Joe Biden gives the worst debate performance in modern history. Even Richard Nixon in 1960, he looked sweaty, he looked nasty, he looked unattractive to people, but he still was coherent and articulate and advanced his narrative. I've never seen in modern history a debate performance as bad as the one that Joe Biden engaged in last night against Donald Trump in the first 2024 presidential debate. Donald Trump destroyed Joe Biden. So what should Democrats do? Well, first we have to assess the damage done, because you can have a bad debate performance and it's fine, right? You have a bad night, you keep moving. And if you're a Democrat, that might be your best bet. You don't have a bench. Biden ain't going nowhere. You're weeks, not years from your convention. You don't have a vice president who is polling so high that he could just step aside and keep the momentum going. None of that is the case. So Biden seems like he is the heir, not the heir apparent. Biden seems like he's the only choice. Biden seems like he is the only choice. But I'm gonna tell you something. If Biden is your choice, you lose. If Biden is your choice, Donald Trump will be the next president, unless there's a new scandal, unless there's some rabbit that they pull out of their hat, unless Donald Trump is literally in jail. I don't see anything that says right now that Joe Biden can defeat Donald Trump. Because the biggest fear that people had was that Joe Biden couldn't do the job moving forward. Yeah, there are people who ideologically don't agree with Biden, but ultimately they know he's a manager, he's a leader, he's capable. They know, the trains will run on time with him as president. There are people who don't have a deep investment in MAGA Republicanism. They don't have a deep investment in liberal progressivism or liberal Democrat life. They don't care if Trump is racist or not. They don't care if Biden is a warmonger or not. Their point is, I want to make sure my taxes are low. I want to make sure that my roads are paved. I want to make sure that my life doesn't change. And so they're going to pick the person that does best for them. And if they see Joe Biden looking like he did last night, not having incoherent sentences and thoughts, and looking like he was way past his bedtime at 9 o'clock, if people feel that way, they're not going to choose him. So you can ride with Biden and say, look, we don't have a choice, but then you're conceding the next 4 years of Donald Trump. Now, if you concede the next 4 years of Donald Trump, you're probably guaranteed a Democrat in 4 more years, because Trump can only do 1 term. And you can nurture your bench. You can bring up some strong candidates. You can have the people who should be running now running then if you're a Democrat. You can do that. But you're conceding that the Supreme Court is going to get more stacked. You're conceding that more and more laws are going to move in ways that are almost irreversible. You're going to concede potentially that if there is a natural disaster or a national disaster like COVID, that people will die more than they need to. There's absolutely no way to defend Joe Biden as an effective leader, or as a progressive leader, or as a justice-oriented leader in the radical sense or in the left-wing sense. Joe Biden is a centrist. He fakes left and he goes right. At best, he's a centrist Democrat, but in foreign policy, he's awful hawkish. He wants more police. He wants more, we could go down a list of things wrong with Joe Biden. That's not the point tonight. The point is that no matter how bad Joe Biden is, I promise you Donald Trump is worse. I can't pretend that he's not. Donald Trump is a much worse outcome for the most vulnerable people in the world. Not for me. Maybe not for you watching. Maybe not. But for a whole lot of vulnerable people, for a whole lot of women who want reproductive justice, for a whole lot of people who need affirmative action, for a whole bunch of people who want citizenship, Donald Trump is a much worse alternative. So if you are a Democrat or you're somebody who just wants Trump out, you need a real alternative. And Joe Biden gives people permission to hold on to the status quo. And then you wonder why people choose Cornel West and Claudia de la Cruz and Robert F. Kennedy and Jill Stein. Because they keep watching the same old candidates pop up, underperform, disappoint us, and then tell us, well, you ain't got no choice. So if you want Trump not to be president, you got to sell low on Biden. I know you want to wait for him to go out on a high horse. You want him to you exit with pomp and circumstance. You want him to be the kind of Democrat version of Reagan, the elder statesman that coasts out and then brings in a George H.W. Bush to have a virtual third term. Ain't gonna happen. Biden is at a low. His approval ratings aren't good. The eye test, he's failing. He embarrassed himself last night. It's time for Biden to go right now. If I'm a Democratic strategist, if I'm a Democratic power broker, I'm whispering to Joe right now, it's time that you step aside. And you step aside, not saying you can't win, you step aside with a health issue. You say you're sick. Say something came up. Say you believe there's somebody else who can run this country. Put your full-throated endorsement behind somebody else. You got to do something. Because this ain't it. It's time, Democrats, for you to sell low on Biden. I know you want to sell high, but you got to sell low. But people are going to say, well, what do you do? Well, you have an open convention and you let the chips fall where they may. Or everybody has to get behind a single candidate. Now, that's not easy. That's nowhere near easy. Kamala Harris is the vice president. It's going to be very difficult to tell people that there's a better option than Kamala Harris. If you chose Kamala Harris as your vice president and you said that she could step in and be president at any moment and do an extraordinary job and keep everything moving consistently, then how the heck can you now move her out of the way and bring in somebody else? So Kamala Harris is your first choice. Here's the problem. Kamala Harris, and I like Kamala Harris as a person. I don't agree with her ideologically, but I don't agree with her any more or less than I do Joe Biden. I think they both have the same problematic politics. But that ain't even my point right now. I'm saying she can't beat Donald Trump. I don't see anybody in this election cycle but a white man beating Donald Trump. Could be a progressive white man. Could be a disappointing white man. But there's the slice of people who still think Donald Trump is a legitimate option. They're probably not voting for Kamala Harris. But I'll get beyond that. There are black men who are polling low on Kamala Harris, and it's not Kamala's fault. Vice President Kamala Harris is no more or less capable than any other vice president we've seen. She is not weak. She is not unintelligent. She is quite intelligent, quite smart, quite experienced. But there's a lot of patriarchy. There's a lot of hate out there in the world. There's a lot of anti-black hate. There's a lot of anti-woman hate. When those two things converge, it gets tough. And so people are often holding Kamala Harris to a different standard. But whatever the reason, let's get beyond that. Look at the numbers. The numbers don't show her doing well. Let's get beyond her current numbers. When she was running for president, which is different than being vice president, she didn't poll well. She didn't do as well as Pete Buttigieg. So what does that mean? It means that there's a really good chance that voters aren't going to get behind Kamala Harris. They might just decide to let the Donald ride out another 4 years. It's not 8, it's only 4. They may say we can handle that. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it might just have to be what it is. Whew. Then there's Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is an interesting choice. He's the one everyone's grooming for the next time around. Gavin Newsom keeps saying he's not the presidential candidate. He doesn't want to be a presidential candidate. He doesn't want to be a presidential nominee. He doesn't want to be any of those things. Gavin Newsom keeps saying that he is just supporting the Biden-Harris ticket. And he's saying, again, he says Kamala Harris is next up. He has said that before. He has to say that. You know why? Because even though Kamala Harris can't win, if anybody perceives that Kamala Harris has been moved aside, if anybody perceives that these white men have jumped the line and taken Kamala Harris the vice president's spot, you know what's going to happen? I'll tell you what's going to happen. Black voters are going to be pissed and they won't get behind Gavin Newsom and they may never forgive him or whoever else runs. So you can't go around Kamala Harris and you can't choose her. Now, the next time around, Gavin Newsom will be the person. I guarantee it won't be Kamala Harris, it'll be Gavin Newsom. But what do you do? There's also, by the way, Josh Shapiro. Josh Shapiro, governor of Pennsylvania, interesting choice. I'm not sure that he has the experience and the timing right now to do it, but in 4 to 8 years, he could also be a vice presidential or presidential possibility. But again, can't go around Kamala Harris. You can't get a black man like Wes Moore to go around Kamala Harris because it creates an internal strife. And I'm not making this the Kamala Harris dilemma. I'm simply saying that black voters are loyal, and other voters are racist and sexist sometimes. So we have to, we got to do what we got to do. We got to do what we got to do. So we got to figure something out. So what does that look like ultimately? To sell low on Biden then means that not only does Biden have to step aside, but the Democratic Party has to agree on who the person is, and there can be no competition for this spot. That means Kamala Harris has to step aside and say, I will support Gavin Newsom or Josh Shapiro and be their VP for a term, or Gavin Newsom has to say, I will be Kamala Harris's VP, and they have to let the chips fall where they may. But you can't win with Biden. If you know you can't win with Biden, even Kamala Harris, who is not, I think, the strongest option, still a better option perhaps than Joe Biden right now. But whatever you do, Democrats, you got to do something. Because if you keep holding pat and you keep saying, oh, we'll come back around, the gap is going to get wider, and we're all going to lose this country.